My son stood before me, his eyes flickering with something I hadn't seen in years: nervousness. The room was dim, the faint hum of a sewing machine lingering in the air from my work earlier. Thomas cleared his throat, his voice almost too soft, like he was afraid of the words. "Mom, can you sell Granny's hands back to us?" I let the question hang, feeling the weight of it press against my chest. My fingers, still calloused from years of stitching, traced the edge of the table. Then I looked up, meeting his gaze, and smiled, not the warm smile I used to give him, but something sharper, something earned. "No, Thomas," I said, my voice steady as the needle I'd threaded 1,000 times. "This time I'm keeping it for myself." I stayed silent after that, but not because I was afraid. I was done being their backup plan. Welcome to the Betrayal Revenge channel, where stories come alive through voices you've never heard told this way before. Behind every smile lies a story of survival. The phone rang, its sharp trill cutting through the stillness of my room at Maple Valley. I was sitting by the window, the late afternoon light filtering through the beige curtains, casting soft shadows on the quilt I was stitching. My hands paused, the needle hovering above the fabric. Something about that ring felt different, urgent, almost expectant. I set the quilt aside and reached for the receiver, my heart giving a small, hopeful flutter. "Hello?" I said, my voice softer than I meant it to be. It was Thomas, my son. His voice was warm, almost too warm, like he was trying to make up for the months of silence. "Mom, we'd love for you to come to Emily's wedding. Everyone's asking for you. It wouldn't be the same without family there." I closed my eyes, letting his words settle over me like a blanket I hadn't felt in years. Family. The word tasted sweet, like the peach jam I used to make for him when he was little. I could still see him as a boy, his small hands sticky as he grinned up at me. "Of course, Thomas," I said, a smile creeping into my voice. "I'll be there." I spent the next few days preparing, my fingers trembling with excitement as I pulled out my old lavender dress from the back of the closet. It smelled faintly of mothballs, but it was mine, chosen years ago for moments I thought mattered. I sat at my small table, the lamplight glowing softly, and carefully hemmed the frayed edges of a silk handkerchief I'd kept since my own wedding day. Each stitch felt like a promise, to myself, to them. I imagined walking into the venue, my family's faces lighting up as they saw me. I pictured Emily, my youngest, radiant in her gown, throwing her arms around me. For the first time in a long while, I felt needed. Maple Valley was quiet that week, the usual hum of the nursing home softened by the spring air. I'd always been the one to bring a little warmth to this place, baking cookies for the staff, knitting scarves for the other residents. "Eleanor, you're too good to us," Doris at the front desk would say, her eyes crinkling as she accepted another batch of my oatmeal raisin. I'd wave her off, but deep down, those moments kept me going. They made me feel like I still had something to give. And now, my family was calling me back. I packed my small suitcase, folding the dress and handkerchief with care, and waited for the day to come. As I zipped up the bag, a small thought nagged at me, like a loose thread I couldn't quite snip. Thomas and Rachel, his wife, hadn't visited in over a year. Their calls were rare, always brief, always about something practical, never just to talk. But I pushed the thought away. This was different. This was Emily's wedding. They wanted me there, didn't they? I stood by the window, the cool glass against my palm, and looked out at the blooming dogwoods in the courtyard. The air smelled of fresh earth, and for a moment, I let myself believe I was going home. I was 67, but in that moment, I felt young again, like the Eleanor who used to dream of family dinners and laughter that filled every corner of the house. But something lingered in the back of my mind, a whisper I couldn't quite hear. Why now? Why after all this time? I shook my head, brushing it off. I was going to be with my family. That was all that mattered. The wedding venue was a blur of white roses and golden lights, the air thick with the scent of lilies and freshly cut grass. I stepped out of the cab, clutching my silk handkerchief, my lavender dress swaying lightly in the evening breeze. The chatter of guests spilled out from the open doors, and for a moment, I let myself believe I belonged here. I smoothed my hair, took a deep breath, and walked inside, my heart pounding with anticipation. Would Emily run to me? Would Thomas smile the way he used to when I'd surprise him with his favorite pie? I scanned the crowd, searching for familiar faces, but all I saw were strangers laughing, clinking glasses, their voices loud and carefree. A young usher guided me to my seat, his smile polite but hurried. "This way, ma'am," he said, leading me past the main tables adorned with crystal centerpieces to a small, round one tucked near the kitchen. The tablecloth was slightly creased, the chairs mismatched. A faint smell of grease lingered from the swinging kitchen doors. I sat down, my hands folded in my lap, and told myself it was fine. Maybe they'd wanted me close to the food, knowing how much I loved to help. But as the minutes ticked by, no one came to greet me. Not Emily, not Thomas, not even Rachel. The other guests at my table, distant cousins or friends of friends, chatted among themselves, their voices a dull hum. I felt like a shadow, present but unseen. I caught a glimpse of Emily across the room, radiant in her white gown, her laughter bright as she posed for photos. My chest swelled with pride, but it ached too. I wanted to call out to her, to tell her how beautiful she looked, but she was surrounded, swept up in the moment. I stayed quiet, my fingers tracing the stitches on my handkerchief. Then came the family photos. I stood up, smoothing my dress, ready to join them. But Rachel appeared, her smile tight, her voice smooth as silk. "Oh, Eleanor, we've got this covered. You know how crowded these shoots get?" She gestured vaguely toward the photographer, who was arranging Thomas, Emily, and the others in a perfect, smiling lineup. I nodded, sinking back into my chair, the heat rising in my cheeks. "Of course," I murmured, though she was already gone. I tried to focus on the meal, the tender roast, the buttery mashed potatoes, but every bite tasted like dust. My eyes kept drifting to the main table, where Rachel leaned close to Thomas, whispering something that made him chuckle. My grandson Luke sat nearby, his face buried in his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen. I waved at him, hoping for a glance, a smile, anything. He didn't look up. I told myself he was just being a teenager, that it wasn't personal. But then I overheard Rachel's voice, low and casual, as she spoke to another guest. "Eleanor understands," she said, her tone dripping with pity. "Older folks can feel a bit out of place at these events." The words cut deeper than I expected, like a needle slipping too far into fabric. Out of place. Was that what I was? I forced a smile, my hands trembling as I reached for my water glass. I wanted to stand up, to walk over to Emily and hug her, to remind them all that I was here, that I mattered. But something held me back, fear maybe, or the weight of years spent swallowing my hurt. I stayed silent, my thoughts spiraling. Had I misread Thomas's call? Had I been invited out of love, or was it just obligation? The room felt smaller, the lights too bright, the laughter too loud. I gripped my handkerchief, the stitches grounding me, each one a reminder of the care I'd poured into this moment, into them. After the reception, Thomas approached, his tie loosened, his smile strained. "Mom, why don't you stay with us for a few weeks? It'd be nice to have you around and, well, we could use someone to watch the house while we're tied up with work." His words sounded kind, but there was a hollowness to them, like a script he'd rehearsed. I wanted to believe he meant it, that this was my chance to be part of their lives again. "That sounds wonderful," I said, my voice brighter than I felt. But as we left the venue, the cool night air brushing my skin, a question gnawed at me. Why did his invitation feel less like a welcome and more like a task? I climbed into their car, the leather seats cold against my legs, and stared out the window as the venue's lights faded behind us. The stars were faint, barely visible through the city's glow. I was going to their home, but something told me I wasn't going to be a guest. I was there to fill a role, to be useful, and deep down, I was starting to wonder if that was all I'd ever been to them, a backup plan, waiting to be called upon when they needed me. The air in Thomas and Rachel's house carried the sterile scent of lavender air freshener, masking something sharper underneath, maybe the faint tang of bleach from the spotless kitchen counters. I stood at the sink, my hands submerged in warm, soapy water, scrubbing a skillet that still held traces of the eggs I'd made for breakfast. The morning light slanted through the window, catching the steam rising from the dishwater, and for a moment it felt like any other day from years ago, when my home was filled with the clatter of plates and the laughter of my children. But this wasn't my home, it was theirs, and I was starting to feel like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. They'd been kind enough at first, or so I told myself. Rachel had shown me to the guest room, a small space with a twin bed and a single-framed photo of a generic beach scene on the wall. "Make yourself at home, Eleanor," she'd said, her smile quick and practiced. Thomas had nodded, his eyes already drifting to his phone. I'd unpacked my suitcase, hanging my lavender dress carefully in the closet, its faint mothball smell mingling with the room's crisp linens. I wanted to believe I was here to reconnect, to be part of their lives again. But as the days passed, that hope began to fray like an old seam. My role became clear almost immediately. Mornings started with me in the kitchen, chopping onions for omelets or stirring oatmeal while Rachel rushed out the door, her heels clicking against the hardwood. "You're a lifesaver, Eleanor," she'd call over her shoulder, her voice bright but distant. Thomas would grab a coffee, mutter a thanks, and disappear into his home office. I'd spend the day tidying, folding laundry, sweeping floors, wiping down counters that were already clean. Luke, my grandson, would breeze through, earbuds in, barely glancing up from his phone. "Hey, Grandma," he'd mumble, more out of habit than affection. I'd smile, my heart twisting, and offer him a cookie from the batch I'd baked. He'd take one without looking at me, the crumbs falling unnoticed as he headed upstairs. I tried to make myself useful, to earn my place. I'd mend Luke's torn backpack, my needle moving with the precision of years spent stitching. I'd rearrange the pantry, grouping cans by size, the way I used to when Thomas was young. But every task felt like a plea, a silent hope that they'd see me, really see me, not just as someone to fill the gaps in their busy lives. At night, I'd lie in the narrow guest bed, the mattress creaking under my weight, and stare at the ceiling, tracing the faint cracks in the plaster. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every thought. Had I been wrong to come here? Was I just a convenience, a temporary fix for their chaotic schedule? The answer came one night, sharp and unyielding, like a needle piercing too deep. It was late, the clock ticking past midnight. I'd gotten up for a glass of water, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. As I passed the living room, I heard voices, low, hushed, but unmistakable. Thomas and Rachel speaking in the kitchen. I froze, my hand resting on the banister, the darkness wrapping around me like a heavy quilt. I should have kept walking, should have gone back to bed, but something held me there, rooted, listening. "When is she leaving?" Rachel's voice was sharp, tinged with impatience. I could picture her, arms crossed, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her elbow. Thomas sighed, the sound heavy, exhausted. "She's old, Rachel. She'll figure it out eventually. No need to push." My breath caught, a sharp pain blooming in my chest. Old. Figure it out. The words echoed, each one a stitch pulling tighter, unraveling the fragile hope I'd been clinging to. Rachel's voice softened, but it carried no warmth. "I just don't want her getting too comfortable. We've got enough to deal with." I stood there, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they'd hear it. The glass I'd meant to fill slipped from my hand, landing softly on the carpeted stair. I didn't move to pick it up. My mind raced, replaying every moment since I'd arrived, the rushed thank yous, the tasks piled on without question, the way their eyes slid past me like I was part of the furniture. I'd been invited to the wedding, to their home, not because they wanted me, but because I was useful, a backup plan, a placeholder. The realization hit like a wave, cold and relentless, washing away the last of my illusions. I don't know how long I stood there, the darkness pressing against my skin. My hands trembled, not with anger, but with a grief so deep it felt like it could swallow me whole. I thought of the years I'd given them, every late-night sewing session to mend their clothes, every meal cooked with love, every sacrifice made without a second thought. And now, this. I was a burden to be managed, a problem to be solved. The next morning, I woke before dawn, my eyes gritty from a sleepless night. The house was still, the air heavy with the promise of rain. I moved quietly, my movements deliberate, as if I were stitching a final seam. I packed my suitcase, folding each item with care, the lavender dress, the silk handkerchief, the scarf I'd knitted for Luke that he'd never worn. My hands were steady, but inside I was unraveling. I wanted to scream, to demand why they'd treated me this way, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. They'd made their choice, and now I had to make mine. I stood in the guest room, the suitcase at my feet, and looked around one last time. The beach photo on the wall seemed to mock me, its serene waves a stark contrast to the storm in my chest. I could still hear Rachel's words, Thomas's sigh, the casual dismissal that had shattered something inside me. I picked up my bag, the weight of it grounding me, and walked to the front door. The house was silent, no one awake to see me go. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, and whispered, "No need to see me out. I know my way." Outside, the sky was heavy with clouds, the air sharp with the promise of a storm. I stepped onto the porch, the wind tugging at my coat, and pulled my suitcase behind me. The wheels scraped against the pavement, a small, defiant sound in the quiet morning. I didn't look back. For the first time in years, I was walking away, not because I had nowhere to go, but because I refused to stay where I wasn't wanted. The bus rattled along the highway, its engine humming a low, steady drone that matched the ache in my chest. I sat by the window, my suitcase wedged between my knees, the cold glass pressing against my forehead. Outside, the world blurred past, fields of green fading into the gray haze of dawn, the occasional flicker of a farmhouse light breaking the monotony. The air inside smelled of stale coffee and worn leather, and every jolt of the bus felt like a reminder. I was alone. No one had come after me when I left Thomas's house. No one had called. I clutched my silk handkerchief, its familiar stitches grounding me, and tried to focus on the road ahead. But where was I going? I didn't know. All I knew was that I couldn't go back, not to Maple Valley, not to the life I'd been living for others. I'd chosen Rosewood on a whim, the name soft and unassuming on the bus schedule. It was a small town, far enough from the city to feel like a fresh start, close enough that I wouldn't feel stranded. When the bus pulled into the station, the sky was heavy with the threat of rain, the air thick with the scent of damp earth. I stepped onto the cracked pavement, my suitcase wheels catching on pebbles, and looked around. Rosewood was quiet, its main street lined with modest shops and a single diner, its neon sign flickering weakly. I rented a room at a boarding house on the edge of town, a narrow space with peeling wallpaper and a bed that creaked under my weight. The landlady, a woman with tired eyes and a smoker's rasp, handed me the key without asking questions. "Rent's due every Friday," she said, and that was that. I unpacked my few belongings, my hands moving slowly, deliberately, as if each item held a piece of the life I was leaving behind. The lavender dress went into the closet, its hem still perfect from my careful stitches. The scarf I'd knitted for Luke stayed in the suitcase, tucked away like a memory I wasn't ready to face. I sat on the bed, the springs groaning, and stared at the small sewing kit on the nightstand. It was all I had left: needles, thread, a few scraps of fabric. My fingers itched to pick it up, to lose myself in the rhythm of stitching. But a voice in my head whispered, "What's the point? Who's it for now?" To keep myself busy, I started sewing again, small things at first. Coin purses, tote bags, each stitch a quiet rebellion against the emptiness threatening to swallow me. The boarding house had a tiny table by the window, and I'd sit there for hours, the morning light catching the glint of my needle as it moved through the fabric. The sound of thread pulling tight was a comfort, a reminder that I could still create something, even if no one noticed. I'd hum softly, old tunes from my childhood, the notes blending with the distant chirp of crickets outside. But the room felt too small, the walls too close, and I knew I couldn't stay cooped up forever. One morning, I gathered my courage and a handful of my handmade bags and headed to the local market. The town square was alive with color, vendors selling fresh produce, children darting between stalls, the air filled with the smell of warm bread and roasted nuts. I set up a small table, my bags arranged neatly, their stitches gleaming under the sunlight. I smoothed my skirt, adjusted my scarf, and waited, my heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. Would anyone care? Would they see the hours I'd poured into each piece, the love woven into every seam? Hours passed, and the crowd moved past me, their eyes skimming over my table without stopping. A woman paused once, her fingers brushing a blue tote before she smiled politely and walked away. My stomach twisted, the familiar sting of rejection creeping in. I told myself it was just one day, that I'd try again tomorrow, but the weight of their indifference settled over me like dust. I packed up early, my hands shaking as I folded the bags, and trudged back to the boarding house, the market's cheerful noise fading behind me. That night, I sat by the window, the street lamp casting a pale glow across my room. I held one of my bags, tracing the stitches with my thumb, and let the tears come. They were quiet, not the sobbing kind, but the kind that slip out when you realize you've been carrying too much for too long. I thought of Thomas's sigh, Rachel's cold words, the way Luke's eyes never met mine. I'd spent my life giving, and now, here I was, alone in a strange town, my work unnoticed, my worth unseen. Was this all I was, a woman whose hands could create but whose heart was left empty? A few days later, I saw a flyer at the market, a group claiming to be a community of artisans looking for handmade goods to sell online. My pulse quickened. Maybe this was my chance. I called the number, my voice hesitant, and a man with a smooth, confident tone told me they'd love to help. "Just send us your products, Eleanor," he said. "We'll take care of the rest, no upfront cost, just a small shipping fee." I hesitated, my instincts prickling, but the promise of being seen was too strong. I packaged my best bags, each one wrapped carefully in tissue paper, and sent them off, my heart lighter than it had been in weeks. Weeks passed, and I heard nothing. I called again, but the number was disconnected. I went to the post office, my hands clutching the receipt, only to learn the address was a vacant lot. The truth hit me like a slap. I'd been scammed. My bags, my hours of work, my fragile hope, gone. I sank onto the bed, the room spinning, and stared at the scraps of fabric scattered across the table. They looked like pieces of me, torn and discarded. I pressed my hands to my face, the calluses rough against my cheeks, and whispered, "Am I really nothing more than this?" The morning after I realized I'd been scammed, I sat at my small table in the Rosewood boarding house, staring at the pile of fabric scraps. The room was quiet, save for the faint creak of the floorboards and the distant hum of a lawnmower outside. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching the dust motes drifting in the air, and for a moment it felt like the world was holding its breath. My hands, still rough from years of stitching, rested on a piece of blue cotton, its edges frayed like my own resolve. I'd lost more than just my bags to those thieves. I'd lost a piece of the hope I'd been clinging to, the belief that I could be something more than a forgotten mother, a discarded plan. But as I sat there, something stirred inside me, a faint spark, like the first flicker of a needle catching thread. I wasn't ready to give up, not yet. I picked up my sewing kit, the weight of it familiar, comforting, and began to stitch. Not for anyone else this time, not for Thomas or Rachel or even the market, just for me. Each pull of the thread felt like a small act of defiance, a way to stitch myself back together. The room smelled faintly of lavender from a sachet I'd made days ago, and the soft clink of my needle against the thimble was a rhythm I could lose myself in. I didn't know where this would lead, but I knew I couldn't stay still, couldn't let the scam be the end of my story. I was 67, but I wasn't done living. A few days later, I wandered into the heart of Rosewood, my suitcase replaced by a canvas bag slung over my shoulder, filled with new purses I'd sewn late into the night. The town felt different now, not welcoming exactly, but less intimidating, like a place I could learn to navigate. I stopped at a small shop called the Thread Haven, its window cluttered with colorful yarn and hand-stitched quilts. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside, the air warm with the scent of cedar and wool. Behind the counter stood a woman about my age, her silver hair pulled into a loose bun, her eyes sharp but kind. Her name tag read Claire. "You've got a good eye for stitching," Claire said, nodding at the purse peeking out of my bag. Her voice was gravelly, like she'd spent years laughing and shouting and living. I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the strap. Just something I do to pass the time, I said, my voice quieter than I meant. She raised an eyebrow, leaning forward. Pass the time? Those stitches are tighter than anything in this shop. You ever think about selling them properly? I opened my mouth to deflect, to say I was too old, too inexperienced, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way Claire looked at me, not with pity, but with a kind of recognition, like she saw the woman I was trying to become. I tried, I admitted, my voice catching. Got scammed, lost everything I sent. Her expression softened, but she didn't coddle me. Instead, she slid a flyer across the counter. Come to our Artisans Revival group. We meet every Tuesday. No scams, just people who make things. You'd fit right in. I took the flyer, its edges slightly worn, and read the words printed in bold, Artisans Revival, Create, Connect, Thrive. My heart thudded, a mix of fear and longing. I wanted to say no, to retreat to the safety of my boarding house, but Claire's voice cut through my doubt. Nobody's too old to start, Eleanor, she said, her eyes locking onto mine. The only thing stopping you is you. Her words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through me. I nodded, tucking the flyer into my bag, and left the shop, the bell's jingle echoing behind me. The first meeting was nerve-wracking. The community center was a low brick building, its walls lined with faded posters and mismatched chairs. The room smelled of coffee and fresh cotton, and a dozen women sat around long tables, their hands busy with needles and thread. I hovered near the door, my purse clutched to my chest until Claire spotted me. Eleanor, get over here, she called, waving me to an empty seat. The other women glanced up, their smiles warm but curious, and I felt exposed, like a seam turned inside out. But as I sat down and pulled out my sewing kit, the tension in my shoulders eased. These women weren't judging me. They were just creating. Claire tossed a pile of fabric scraps onto the table. We're making tote bags today, she said. Show us what you've got. I picked up a piece of green canvas, its texture rough against my fingers, and began to stitch. The room filled with the soft hum of conversation, the clatter of scissors, the occasional laugh. I listened as the women shared stories of lost jobs, broken marriages, dreams they'd tucked away. Their voices wove together like threads, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. Claire leaned over, inspecting my work. That's factory-level precision, she said, her tone matter-of-fact. You ever try selling online? I shook my head, the memory of the scam still raw. I wouldn't know where to start, I said. She grinned, pulling out her phone. Good thing you've got us. We'll teach you. Photos, listings, the works. Your bags deserve to be seen. Her confidence was infectious, and I felt something shift inside me, a quiet strength I hadn't known I still had. Over the next few weeks, the Artisans Revival became my lifeline. I learned to photograph my bags, angling them in the soft morning light to catch their textures. I wrote descriptions, my words clumsy at first, but growing bolder with each try. Claire showed me how to set up an online shop, her fingers flying across her laptop as she muttered about algorithms and hashtags. You're building a brand, Eleanor, she said. Granny's hands. It's not just bags. It's you. The name stuck, a nod to the hands that had carried me through decades of love and loss. My first sale came late one night, the notification pinging on the cheap phone I'd bought in Rosewood. I stared at the screen, my heart racing as I read the order. 1 blue tote shipped to a woman in Ohio. I ran my fingers over the bag, its stitches perfect, and felt a rush of pride so fierce it brought tears to my eyes. This wasn't just a sale. It was proof that I could still matter, that my work could reach beyond the confines of my past. I packed the bag carefully, slipping in a handwritten note, made with care, just for you. Eleanor. The act felt sacred, like stitching a piece of myself into the world. I sat back, the room bathed in the soft glow of my lamp, and let the moment sink in. The air smelled of fresh cotton and the faint tang of my evening tea, cooling in its mug. Outside, a dog barked, its voice sharp against the quiet night. I thought of Thomas, of Rachel, of the life I'd left behind. They hadn't called, hadn't checked on me, and the silence stung. But here, in this small room with my needle and thread, I was building something new. Not for them, not for anyone else, just for me. The Rosewood Community Center was alive with the hum of creativity, its tables cluttered with fabric swatches and half-finished projects. I sat at my usual spot, the morning light streaming through the tall windows, catching the glint of my needle as it wove through a piece of crimson canvas. The air smelled of fresh coffee and the faint musk of old wood, mingling with the sharp tang of new thread. My hands moved with a confidence I hadn't felt in years, each stitch precise, each seam a testament to the woman I was becoming. The Artisans' Revival Group had become my sanctuary, a place where I wasn't Eleanor the forgotten mother, but Eleanor the maker, the woman whose hands told stories. Claire had been pushing me to do more than just sell online. "You've got something special, Eleanor," she'd said one evening, her eyes glinting with mischief as she handed me a flyer for a local workshop. "People need to see you, not just your bags." I'd hesitated, my stomach twisting at the thought of standing in front of strangers, but her words echoed in my mind. "The only thing stopping you is you." So I'd agreed, my voice barely above a whisper, to host a stitching workshop at the community center. I spent nights preparing, sketching patterns, practicing what I'd say. My boarding house room became a chaotic studio, fabric scraps spilling across the bed, my lamp burning late into the night. The scent of lavender from my sachet mingled with the metallic tang of pins, grounding me as I worked. The workshop day arrived, crisp and bright, the autumn air carrying the scent of fallen leaves. I stood at the front of the room, my hands trembling as I arranged my materials, spools of thread, needles, stacks of pre-cut fabric. The participants trickled in, a mix of young women and older retirees, their faces curious, some skeptical. I cleared my throat, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. "I'm Eleanor," I began, my voice shaky but growing steadier. "Today we're going to make something with our hands, something that's yours." I held up one of my totes, its stitches gleaming under the fluorescent lights, and saw their eyes widen, their murmurs of interest filling the room. As we worked, the room came alive with the soft clatter of scissors and the hum of conversation. I moved between tables, offering tips, adjusting stitches, my nerves melting away with each smile I received. A young woman named Sarah, her hair tied back with a scrunchie, grinned as she finished her first seam. "This is harder than it looks," she said, holding up her slightly crooked tote. I laughed, touching her shoulder. "It's not about perfection, it's about the story in your hands." Her eyes lit up, and in that moment I felt a warmth I hadn't known I could still create, not just for my family, but for strangers, for myself. The workshop was a success, the participants leaving with their creations and promises to return. I stood at the door, waving them off, my chest swelling with a pride so fierce it brought tears to my eyes. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was building something. Granny's Hands wasn't just a name, it was a legacy, stitched with every ounce of my heart. I walked back to my boarding house that evening, the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the air cool against my skin. For the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. A few days later, something unexpected happened. I was at the community center, sorting through fabric donations, when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Claire, a video link with the words, "You need to see this." I opened it, my breath catching as I saw my grandson Luke's face on the screen. He was standing in what looked like a school hallway, holding up one of my totes, his grin wide and unself-conscious. "This is my grandma's," he said, his voice loud with pride. "She made it by hand, like all of it. Isn't that cool?" The video cut to a close-up of the tote, my careful stitches visible, the Granny's Hands tag fluttering in the frame. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling as I replayed it. Luke, the boy who'd barely looked up from his phone at the wedding, was bragging about me, about my work. The video had thousands of views, comments flooding in. "Those stitches are insane. Where can I buy one?" "Your grandma's a legend." My throat tightened, a mix of joy and disbelief washing over me. I remembered Luke as a toddler, his chubby hands clutching my fingers as we walked through the park, his laughter bright as the sun. I'd thought I'd lost him to the indifference of his parents, but here he was seeing me, sharing me with the world. Claire burst into the room, her laughter filling the space. "Eleanor, you're going viral," she said, clapping her hands. "Luke's video is blowing up on TikTok. Granny's hands is everywhere." I shook my head, still processing, the weight of it sinking in. My bags, my story, were reaching people I'd never met, touching lives I'd never imagined. Orders started pouring into my online shop, each one a small affirmation that I was more than a backup plan, more than a shadow in someone else's life. That night I sat at my table, the boarding house quiet except for the soft patter of rain against the window. I held the crimson tote I'd been working on, its fabric warm under my fingers, and let myself feel the moment. The room smelled of damp earth and the faint sweetness of my cooling tea, the lamp casting a golden glow across the scattered threads. I thought of the years I'd spent defining myself through others, Thomas's mother, Rachel's helper, Luke's grandma. But now I was Eleanor, the woman whose hands created beauty, whose heart refused to break. I looked at the stack of orders waiting to be filled, the names of strangers who believed in my work. I was standing on the edge of something bigger, something I'd built myself. But as I threaded my needle, a question lingered, sharp and insistent. What would happen when Thomas and Rachel saw this? Would they try to claim what I'd created, or would they finally see me for who I was? The Rosewood boarding house was bathed in the soft glow of dusk, the air heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth and the faint hum of my sewing machine still lingering from an afternoon of work. I sat at my small table, a half-finished tote bag spread out before me, its green canvas catching the lamplight. My hands, steady now from months of stitching, paused as I heard a knock at the door, sharp, hesitant, not the casual rap of Claire or the delivery boy. My heart gave a small, uneasy thud. I smoothed my apron, wiped a stray thread from my fingers, and opened the door. Thomas stood there, his shoulders hunched, his tie loosened like he'd been tugging at it all day. Rachel was beside him, her arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin line. The porch light cast shadows across their faces, making their expressions hard to read, but I saw the flicker of discomfort in Thomas's eyes, the way Rachel's gaze darted past me into the room. "Mom," Thomas said, his voice low, almost rehearsed. "Can we come in?" I stepped aside, my throat tightening, and gestured to the two mismatched chairs by the table. The air felt thick, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. They sat, the chairs creaking under their weight, and I took my place across from them, my hands folded in my lap. The room was small, the walls lined with fabric scraps and pinned patterns, a stark contrast to the sterile perfection of their home. I could still smell the faint lavender from my sachet, mingling with the metallic tang of my sewing kit. Thomas cleared his throat, his fingers drumming on the table, and I braced myself. I knew this wasn't a visit to catch up, to mend what had been broken. They wanted something. "Mom, we've been following your success," Thomas began, his voice careful like he was stepping over broken glass. "Granny's hands, it's really taken off. Luke's video, the orders, it's impressive." Rachel nodded, her smile tight, practiced. "We're proud of you, Eleanor," she said, but the words felt hollow, like a line from a script she didn't believe. I stayed silent, my eyes fixed on Thomas, waiting for the real reason they'd come. The ticking of the clock on the wall was loud, each second stretching the tension tighter. Thomas leaned forward, his hands clasped. "Things have been tough for us lately," he said, his voice dropping. "Work's been unsteady, and we got some debts piling up. We were thinking—" He paused, glancing at Rachel, who gave him a small nod. "Maybe you could sell Granny's hands to us. We could take it to the next level, expand it, make it a real business. You'd still get credit, of course." He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. The words hit me like a needle piercing too deep, sharp and unexpected. Sell Granny's hands? The brand I'd built from nothing? The stitches that had pulled me out of the darkness? The proof that I was more than their backup plan? I leaned back in my chair, my hands gripping the edge of the table, the wood cool against my palms. My mind raced, flashing back to the wedding, to the kitchen where they'd whispered about me like I was a burden, to the years I'd given them everything, my time, my love, my heart. only to be cast aside. And now they wanted to take this too? I looked at Thomas, searching for the boy I'd raised, the one who'd clung to my hand during thunderstorms, who'd promised to make me proud. But all I saw was a man who thought he could buy what I'd fought for, who thought my work was just another solution to his problems. Rachel's eyes were on me, expectant, like she was waiting for me to nod, to agree, to slip back into the role I'd always played. The air in the room felt heavy, the faint scent of rain seeping through the cracked window, and for a moment I was tempted to lash out, to let the anger I'd buried for so long spill over. But I didn't. I took a slow breath, the kind that steadies a trembling hand before a difficult stitch, and let the silence stretch. My fingers traced the edge of the tote bag on the table, its stitches perfect, each one a piece of me. I thought of Claire, of the artisan's revival, of the strangers who'd bought my bags and written me notes about how they felt seen, understood. I thought of Luke's video, his proud grin, the way he'd called me a legend. Granny's Hands wasn't just a business. It was my life, my voice, my refusal to be invisible. "No, Thomas," I said at last, my voice calm but unyielding, like the steady pull of thread through fabric. "Granny's Hands isn't for sale, not to you, not to anyone." His eyes widened, a flicker of shock crossing his face, and Rachel's smile faltered, her fingers tightening around her purse. I leaned forward, meeting Thomas's gaze. "You see, I used to be your backup plan, always there when you needed me. But this?" I gestured to the fabric, the patterns, the life I'd built. "This is mine, and I'm keeping it." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it, his hands falling limp in his lap. Rachel shifted, her lips parting as if to argue, but she said nothing. The clock ticked on, the sound louder now, filling the space between us. I felt a strange calm settle over me, like the moment after a seam is finished, when you know it's strong enough to hold. I'd spent years giving them everything, but this time I was choosing myself. I stood smoothing my apron and walked to the door, holding it open. "You can go now," I said, my voice steady, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and triumph. Thomas rose slowly, his shoulders slumped, and Rachel followed, her heels clicking against the floor. As they stepped onto the porch, Thomas turned, his eyes searching mine. "Mom, he started, but I shook my head, cutting him off. I didn't need his apologies, not yet. Maybe not ever. The door closed behind them, the sound soft but final, like the snip of scissors through thread. I stood there, the room quiet except for the faint patter of rain against the window. My hands trembled, but not with regret, with the weight of what I'd done. I'd said no. For the first time, I'd drawn a line, and it felt like freedom. The invitation arrived in a cream-colored envelope, its edges slightly worn from the journey to my Rosewood boarding house. I sat at my table, the morning light filtering through the window, casting a soft glow on the fabric scraps scattered around me. The air smelled of fresh cotton and the faint sweetness of my morning tea, cooling in its mug. My hands, steady from months of stitching, paused as I opened the letter, my heart giving a small, curious thud. It was from the National Craft Festival, a prestigious event I'd only heard about in whispers at the Artisans' Revival meetings. They wanted me, Eleanor, the woman who'd once been a backup plan, to showcase Granny's Hands at their annual gathering. "Your work tells a story of resilience and craftsmanship," the letter read. "We'd be honored to have you join us." I read the words again, my fingers tracing the embossed logo, and felt a warmth spread through me, like the first sip of tea on a cold morning. Honored. The word felt foreign, almost too big for someone like me, but it settled in my chest, heavy and real. I thought of the nights spent sewing alone, the scam that had nearly broken me, the workshop where strangers had smiled at my creations. Granny's Hands wasn't just a collection of bags anymore. It was proof that I could rise, that I could be seen. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into my sewing kit, and let myself imagine standing at a festival booth, my work on display, my story laid bare for the world. The festival was held in a sprawling park, its grounds alive with color and sound. I arrived early, my suitcase packed with totes and purses, each one tagged with the Granny's Hands logo, stitched with soul. Claire had insisted on driving me, her old pickup truck rattling along the highway, the air filled with her laughter and the scent of gasoline. "You're a star, Eleanor," she'd said, her eyes crinkling as she helped me unload. "Don't you dare forget it." I smiled, my nerves buzzing, and set up my booth, arranging each bag with care. The canvas gleamed under the sunlight, the stitches catching the light like tiny promises. The air was thick with the smell of grilled corn and fresh pine, the hum of voices blending with the strum of a nearby guitar. As the festival began, people drifted by, their eyes lingering on my work. A young couple paused, the woman running her fingers over a blue tote, her voice soft with wonder. "These are incredible," she said, turning to me. "Did you make them all yourself?" I nodded, my throat tight, and told her about Granny's hands, about the nights spent stitching, the hands that had carried me through loss and rediscovery. She listened, her eyes bright, and bought 2 bags, slipping a note into my hand as she left. "Thank you for sharing your heart." I tucked the note into my pocket, my chest swelling with a pride I hadn't known I could feel. The day unfolded like a dream. Reporters from local papers stopped by, their cameras flashing as they asked about my journey. "Eleanor's work is more than craft," one wrote later, her words printed in a magazine I'd never expected to see. "It's a testament to the power of reinvention, a story woven into every stitch." I stood behind my booth, my hands clasped to keep them from trembling, and watched as people lined up, their voices eager, their hands reaching for my creations. The festival was loud, chaotic, but in that moment, I felt a quiet strength, like the steady pull of thread through fabric. Then came Luke. I saw him before he saw me, his lanky frame weaving through the crowd, his phone in hand, his eyes scanning the booths. My heart leapt, a mix of joy and apprehension. He hadn't told me he was coming, hadn't called since his viral video. I smoothed my apron, my fingers brushing the calluses that had become my badge of honor, and waited. When he spotted me, his face broke into a grin, the kind I hadn't seen since he was a boy, chasing fireflies in my backyard. "Grandma!" he called, bounding over, his voice cutting through the festival's hum. "This is so cool!" He threw his arms around me, his hug warm and unself-conscious, and for a moment I was back in Maple Valley, holding a sticky-handed toddler who thought I was the world. "Look at all this," he said, gesturing to my booth, his eyes wide with pride. "You're like famous now." I laughed, the sound lighter than I'd felt in months, and handed him a small coin purse I'd made just for him, its stitches shaped like the gears he loved to tinker with. "For you," I said, my voice soft. He clutched it, his grin widening. "Grandma, I want to learn how to do this. You're so badass." The word caught me off guard, and I laughed again, my cheeks flushing. Badass. Me, Eleanor, the woman who'd once sat silently at a wedding, who'd packed her bags in the dark to escape a house that didn't want her. I looked at Luke, his excitement infectious, and felt a shift inside me. He saw me, not as a helper, not as a burden, but as a creator, a force. "We'll start with the basics," I said, ruffling his hair, "but you've got to promise to keep up." He nodded, his eyes shining, and for the first time, I felt like I was passing something forward, not just holding on to what I'd built. As the festival wound down, I stood at my booth, packing the last of my bags. The air was cooler now, the scent of pine stronger as the sun dipped below the trees. I thought of Thomas and Rachel, of their stunned faces when I'd refused to sell Granny's hands. They hadn't called since, hadn't reached out, and the silence was both a wound and a relief. But here, surrounded by people who valued my work, by Luke's pride, by the notes tucked into my pocket, I felt whole. I wasn't just Thomas's mother or Rachel's inconvenience. I was Eleanor, the artisan, the woman whose hands had stitched a new life. The festival lights had faded, replaced by the soft glow of street lamps as I stood in the Rosewood Town Square, the autumn air cool against my skin. The National Craft Festival was over, but its echoes lingered. Luke's proud grin, the weight of strangers' notes in my pocket, the way my hands had felt alive, stitching my story into every bag I'd displayed. I walked slowly, my suitcase trailing behind me, its wheels whispering against the pavement. The scent of pine and roasted chestnut still hung in the air, mingling with the faint dampness of the evening. My boarding house was just a few blocks away, but I wasn't ready to go back, not yet. I needed to hold on to this moment, to let it sink deep into my bones. I stopped at a bench overlooking the square, its iron frame cold under my hands as I sat. The town was quiet now, the market stalls packed away, the hum of the festival replaced by the distant chirp of crickets. I opened my suitcase, pulling out a small tote I'd kept for myself, its crimson canvas warm against my fingers. The Granny's Hands tag fluttered in the breeze, the words, "Stitched with Soul," catching the lamplight. I traced the stitches, each one a marker of the journey I'd taken, from the wedding where I'd been invisible, to the boarding house where I'd rebuilt myself, to the festival where I'd been seen, truly seen, for the first time. My mind drifted to the years I'd spent living for others. I remembered the late nights sewing Thomas's school uniforms, my eyes burning as I worked by lamplight, knowing he'd never noticed the care in each seam. I thought of Rachel's cold whispers, the way she'd dismissed me as out of place, and Thomas's sigh, heavy with the assumption that I'd always be there, waiting to fix their messes. I'd been their backup plan, a shadow filling the gaps in their lives, my own dreams tucked away like scraps in a drawer. For so long I'd believed that was my role, to give, to sacrifice, to fade quietly into the background. But not anymore. I looked down at the tote, its stitches strong and deliberate, and felt a clarity settle over me, like the moment a needle finds its mark. I wasn't just Eleanor, the mother, the grandmother, the helper. I was Eleanor, the artisan, the woman who'd turned her pain into beauty, her silence into a voice that reached across the country. Granny's Hands wasn't just a brand. It was my rebellion, my refusal to be defined by anyone else's needs. I'd spent half my life stitching up the holes in other people's stories, but now I was weaving my own. I stood, the bench creaking softly, and lifted the tote to my shoulder. The square was empty, but I felt full of the pride in Luke's eyes, the warmth of Claire's encouragement, the strangers who'd seen themselves in my work. I thought of the festival, the way the crowd had gathered at my booth, their voices blending into a chorus of admiration. "Your hands tell a story," one woman had said, her eyes shining as she held a purse close. She was right. My hands, rough and lined with years of labor, had carried me here, to this moment, where I was no longer a placeholder but a creator, a force. I took a step forward, the suitcase rolling behind me, its sound a steady rhythm against the quiet night. The air was crisp, the stars faint but visible, peeking through the clouds like tiny stitches in the sky. I thought of Thomas and Rachel, their stunned silence when I'd refused to sell Granny's Hands. They hadn't called since, and I didn't expect them to. But that was okay. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had Luke's pride, Claire's friendship, the artisan's revival, and the thousands of people who'd found something real in my work. I had myself. As I reached the boarding house, I paused at the door, my hand resting on the knob. The lamp inside cast a warm glow through the window, illuminating the fabric scraps on my table, the sewing kit waiting for me. I closed my eyes, letting the truth settle deep within me. For half my life, I lived to fill the empty spaces in other people's worlds, I whispered, my voice steady, unwavering. But today, I live to write my own story. I opened the door, the familiar creak welcoming me home. The room smelled of lavender and fresh thread, a reminder of the life I'd built, stitch by stitch. I set the tote on the table, its tag fluttering one last time, and smiled. A real smile, not for anyone else, but for me. Granny's Hands wasn't just a name, it was my legacy, my heart, my soul, stitched into every seam. The Rosewood boarding house was quiet, the only sound the soft rustle of fabric as I folded the last tote of the day. The lamp on my table cast a golden glow across the room, illuminating the stacks of thread and the scattered pins that had become my world. The air smelled of lavender and the faint tang of fresh cotton, a comforting reminder of the life I'd stitched together, piece by piece. I leaned back in my chair, my hands resting on the crimson canvas of a granny's handbag, its tag, stitched with soul, fluttering gently in the draft from the open window. Outside, the night was still, the stars faint but steady, like the quiet strength I'd found within myself. I thought of the festival, of Luke's proud grin, of the strangers who'd held my bags and seen my story in their seams. I thought of Thomas and Rachel, their silence a wound that no longer bled. I'd been their backup plan, a shadow they'd called upon when it suited them, but I'd stepped into the light, claiming a life that was mine alone. Granny's hands wasn't just a brand, it was my voice, my heart, my refusal to be forgotten. Every stitch I'd made, every late night spent threading a needle, had led me here, to a place where I was no longer defined by what I gave others, but by what I created for myself. I stood, smoothing my apron, and walked to the window, the cool night air brushing my skin. The town square was dark, its benches empty, but I could still feel the energy of the festival, the hum of voices, the weight of being seen. I'd spent years believing my worth lay in what I could do for my family, but now I knew better. My worth was in my hands, my resilience, my ability to rise from betrayal and build something beautiful. I closed my eyes, letting the truth settle deep within me, like a final, perfect stitch. But this wasn't just my story. It was a story for anyone who'd ever felt like a placeholder, a convenience, a plan B in their own life. I thought of the women at the Artisans' Revival, their hands weaving their own dreams, of the festival goers who'd shared their struggles with me, of Luke, who'd seen me not as a duty but as a legend. We all deserve to be more than someone else's solution. We all deserve to stitch our own stories. I turned back to the table, my fingers brushing the tote, and felt a spark of purpose. This was my call, not just to myself, but to anyone listening. Have you ever been treated like a backup plan in your own family? I said aloud, my voice soft but firm, carrying the weight of every stitch I'd made. Don't stay silent. Don't let anyone else decide your worth. Share your story below, because every one of us deserves a voice of our own. I sat down, the chair creaking softly, and picked up my needle, the familiar weight grounding me. The night stretched out before me, full of possibility, and I knew this was only the beginning. Granny's hands would keep growing, and so would I. The world was waiting to hear my story, and yours.